I mean, seriously, guys, I'm doing 35 miles an hour. Look at that. The 2012 Fiat 500. I am so excited, I can't stand it. I love this car. And today I get a chance to take a look at the outside, the inside, get it on the road, and tell you what I actually think about it. All right, welcome back to All Cars, y'all. I'm John, and if you have ever watched my channel, certainly some of the older videos, I have talked a lot about the Fiat 500. I love this car. If I could manage to have a second car, it would be one of these, I think, because I truly just love them and what they bring to the marketplace. And I'm thrilled that luckily somebody who lives surprisingly close near me, only about 5 minutes away, had this nearly pristine 2012 model and offered to let me have a chance to, well, play around with it and give you a review of it. Now, every time I look at a used car, I do ask two questions. The first is, would I recommend this car to other people? And the second is, would I be proud to own one? And I'll answer both those questions at the end. The Fiat 500 was really part of that post-war resurgence of Europe. It could be classed with the Mini, with the Citroën 2CV, with the Volkswagen Beetle, and it really helped mobilize Italy. Now, originally it had a rear engine that was air-cooled, and they sold it in one generation for, I don't even remember, 23 years or something like that. Fiat has always been good at making small cars. By the 90s, beginning of the 2000s, their stuff was kind of, well, boring is what it was. And this car really came out at basically that same wave of nostalgia that brought us the Ford Thunderbird, the new Beetle, the new Mini, all those other cars, and this came kind of late. This was released in 2007 in Europe, and then they brought it to America in, I believe, 2010. And again, this is a 2012 500 Cabriolet. And so that means it's got the base engine, it's got an automatic transmission, but it's in fantastic condition. Now, when they redesigned it, interestingly, you would think that the success of the Mini is what brought it about, but that's not the case at all. Fiat actually looked at the sales success in Europe of the smart car. This little two-seater, right? That little tiny engine up there, and they said, we need a piece of that. So they actually came up with a prototype that they called a 3+1 seating. And that is that the passenger seat and the dashboard, you can actually move everything forward and have space for one adult in the back seat. It looks very much like this. They kind of did away with that idea and moved straight to this. The original 500 also was considered to have a front engine as well, but one of those prototypes they were experimenting with had, well, it caught fire. And so they ended up going with the rear engine to begin with. So let's take a look at the styling, and up front, it's adorable. There's no matter how you slice it, this is adorable. It's got this aggressive little ridge right here, the two circular headlights that play back to the original styling, but they're projector beam. You've got the fog lights underneath. You've got this Fiat badge with the two wings, and then this little tiny mouth underneath it. If I was to say anything about the styling of this car, it's that I wish I had more of a grille. But the fact is that it's not as unusual looking as it could have been because of the number of EVs we've got now that don't have any grills at all. Think of the Model 3, for example. This doesn't look that weird. Now, down the side, for some reason, you've got these down here really low, really close to the tire, but you end up with this clamshell kind of hood. And I'd like to point out the proportions of this car are weird. It's very upright, but very, very tiny. Look at the hood. I can stand here, and I can touch these with one arm without stretching. That's how small this thing is. The hood is like 2 pizza cartons put together. But down the side, you get a little light right here, you get a little bumper strip right here, and you get this nice crease right here, but it rides above the door handles. You see so many cars where it runs right through it. I've done a couple where you talk about this, but this runs right up here, blacked out, 500 logo right there, little chrome on the mirrors. It's a sharp looking little car. And then around the back, you end up with styling very reminiscent of the original 500. Again, very close here, down in the bumper, close to the tire. These look like huge, humongous taillights, but they're like the size of my hand. They're not that big. It's the proportions of the car that kind of throw everything off here. The key is also adorable. 3 buttons: lock, unlock, hatch, and the key flips out like a switchblade. Absolutely love it, but I will say this is the start of any complaints I would have about this car, and that is that their slavish devotion to the original design, modernizing it, updating it for the current age, well, you end up with some challenges that, well, they couldn't engineer their way out of. So around the back, you press the unlock button, or the open hatch button, and absolutely nothing happens. I guess that unlocks it separately. I'm not really sure, but what you end up with is you don't have the benefit of this being a hatchback. You end up with this little mail slot to slide things in. Now, once you get in there, it's actually a pretty good size. You could probably get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe bags of groceries back here. Or if you and somebody are taking a trip, you could get a couple of little bags back here. The rear seats do lay down, but overall, it's just not that big. The thing is, it's bigger than you would think looking at the proportions of it. Now, continuing down the passenger side, they did put the gas filler on the devil's side. Really sharp looking interior. We'll talk more about that in a minute, but this is the latch for the back seat. Move my thing out of the way. You can see how much space is right there behind the front seat. This is a really tight opening. I'm not getting back there to show you how comfortable it is. I'm afraid that if I do, I'll never get back out. If you push the seat like this first, it will not slide back. You've got to slide it back first before you latch the seat in place. All right, looking at the interior of the 500, and I got to say, the overwhelming thing is it's normal. I mean, there's some things about it that are a little weird. Like, I can't figure out how to lock the doors. But I've got it all started. And let's start here. I mean, you put your arm down, it rests right there. You got a nice little place. I'd stick my wallet right there. Mirror controls. You know, here you go when you talk about what you get. It just kind of moves. Really cheap plastic there. Something like, almost like something you'd find in a toy, or actually it feels a little bit like a Christmas ornament. But this is a little high. That's just a touch low, but there's no problem getting in. This car's tall enough. And if you can see here, look at that. I can get my whole fist up above it. One touch for the sunroof. I'm not going to mess with that. But, you know, you get an Italian car and you expect it to be weird, and this isn't. It's stylish in a way that you don't see in other cars. I mean, you've got controls here on the steering wheel, you know, air bag. The gauges are really cool because you've got the speedometer on the outside, got the tachometer on the inside, and then you've got this little area right here of amber. So you can see it has just over 58,000 miles on it. For some reason, the time is bigger. It tells you the temperature outside. It tells me in my part. The problem is I can't see it. It doesn't matter where the sun is. I can't see that. Everything is just a little too small for me, but it's all enclosed in this nice little pod. You know, a couple vents up high, you got a radio beneath. Obviously, this is before amazing infotainment systems that take up everything. You know, 3 sport mode, big buttons right in the middle, and then down here you've got the air conditioning system, and it's modern enough, it's got an auto. You just turn it on and set the temperature. But what I love is that they avoided doing what everybody else does. They didn't do an expanse. They didn't carry this, which is a really, really hard plastic, right? This is really hard. There's no soft touch except for the steering wheel here. But at least they did this. Now, when my wife first got in a 500, her first comment was, oh, you want to talk about a cheap interior, this is cheap. But I love it because it's different than everything else. It's stylish, and sure, it's just thin painted plastic. But gosh, they can save some money, they can save some weight and make it look pretty stylish. I love it. Now down here, this is a little weird. They put the window switches next to the gear shifter, and you've got this type of gear shifter here with up and down. I'm not going to mess with that because it's not my car. Pretty cool. They give you just a place to throw some stuff and a couple of really small drink holders. You're not going to put your super big gulp in there. I mean, overall, it's just a cool car. The size of the glove box. It's cool, but it's almost boring that you expect it to be this weird, off-the-wall thing. The worst I can say is the ergonomics are a little funny. And what I mean by that is, I got to turn on the air conditioner, is everything is just a little weird. Like if you're used to sitting in Fords or Chevys and Hondas and Toyotas and Nissans and things like that, everything here feels a little weird. Like this brake lever down here, it's really far away. I mean, I actually have to lean down into it. This is really low, like really low. All of the, even the latch is a little weird. The space here is a little tight. I can't quite spread as much as I want to. And the center right here, I can't quite spread as much as I want to. The seats are fantastically comfortable. And once you're here, there's a ton of leg room. I could move this seat forward. In fact, I think I will. There we go. Just everything feels a little off. You know what I mean? It's not bad. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's bad. It just feels different. But let's, shifts fantastically. Let's get this thing on the road. So again, this has about 101 horsepower. I've read 100 and I've read 101. And first opinions are extremely positive. It's noisy in here. I'll go ahead and tell you that. There is a ton of road noise. There's a ton of wind noise. And for those of you who are going to comment, well, you got a cloth top. I'm talking about there's wind noise over here. These side view mirrors aren't really that big. They could be bigger and they still don't seem big enough. And we're off. So if you don't get into the accelerator very much, it accelerates at a leisurely pace. It's not dog slow, right? If you've ever driven an old car, 60 horsepower and a carburetor, it doesn't feel like that. It's not that dog slow, but it's not fast. It's peppy enough. You're always reminded this is a city car. I've gotten this thing up a little over 45. I don't think I want to drive it on the interstate, at least not for very long. It's comfortable. The steering wheel, I would make it just a touch thicker, but it's comfortable. You can get it set to a good distance. The gauges are relatively clear. Again, I can't see the amber stuff down here. But the noise is my biggest problem. There's a lot of road noise, a lot of wind noise. It just sounds like the sound is pouring in. I definitely would like to try one of the hardtop versions to see if it makes any difference at all. The ride is perhaps better than you would think. It's never completely settled. You don't really glide over things, but it's not as harsh as you would expect. It's a weird combination of like gliding over things and then all of a sudden being like, bang, it finds a bump. Somehow it finds a bump. The steering is quick, but very boosted. There's not a lot of feel, but there is a little bit of a heft to it. It actually makes me think of, in some ways, it makes me think of an old non-power steering car once you get moving. It's got that kind of heft to it. Of course, I get behind a bunch of people who are going really slowly. You know, I struggle with where this car actually sits in the marketplace, and I think that's why it didn't succeed. When this was introduced, they actually started building them in a plant down in Mexico. Fiat Chrysler did, and Fiat's association with Chrysler has not done anything to its interior quality, the materials. And these have a reputation of not being reliable, but what I've not heard is that they're catastrophically unreliable. It's more wear items. You know, I've watched a bunch of reviews of these things where people have talked about the seats wear out and, you know, paint failing and things just wearing out overall, like they're not buying the best quality materials. And I don't see it in this one. This one's been very, very well taken care of, and I think that's what you see a lot of the difference in American attitude, perhaps, versus some more European, is we expect our cars to be perfect all the time and never have to pay any attention to them. I think Europeans, I think overall they understand if they take good care of their car, it should last. If they don't, well, it's probably not going to. And this is a great example of what happens when you take care of one. But like that bump, goes over it very nicely. No crashing, no banging, no undue body motions, right? It is tall, so it does lean a lot. But, see, you can see my head bounce. But I wonder its position in the market, and I think that's why it didn't really sell well. Other than Fiats don't have a great reputation, there's a lot of people who don't remember when Fiat was sold here in America. Their second year, I believe, was their best sales year, and it was only like 48,000. It was downhill ever since then until they did eventually cancel the car, which is a great shame. They brought the 500L here, which failed, the 500X, their crossover, which failed, and then they brought the 124, which is essentially a Mazda Miata, with a Fiat engine in it, turbocharged engine, and I don't think it sold very well either. I've never looked it up. And I think that's a shame. I like variety, and driving the same old boring Japanese cars day in and day out, where other manufacturers are trying to chase the Japanese to boring and trying to make their cars not boring by coming up with ridiculous styling, just gets kind of old. I mean, my major complaints here for this car is the ride is unsettled a little bit. It's a short wheelbase vehicle. It's narrow. I mean, seriously, guys, I'm doing 35 miles an hour. Look at that. You know, this is kind of a bumpy road. That's it. You know, anyway, it isn't harsh per se. It just reminds you it's a short wheelbase vehicle. It's a small vehicle. It's a very light vehicle. I would say that it feels more eager than anything else. Like, things that are not a supercar, this is not going to overwhelm you with power. This feels like a puppy. This feels like a black lab puppy that wants to be taken out and played with. It's not a Mini, okay? It's not a supercar. It's not hyped up. It doesn't have the overwhelming power to get you excited. But man, it's a hoot to drive. It's got great visibility, except for this huge rear view mirror in my way. But going back to my detriments of this car is the more I sit in it, the foot area is a little narrow. This is a little close, but it's actually perfect height. and the perfect distance to set my arm and drive. The center here, right next to the gear shifter, is a little close to my knee. I can't quite spread like I normally do. And I like to rest my hand on the gear shifter. And when I've done that before, it wants to pop over into manual mode. Here's a little creak. I'm not sure that's not my phone, but there's a little creak over here. Other than that, it feels fantastic for a car that's essentially 9 years old. You know, I just passed a Scion. Wouldn't drive a Scion over this thing. Oh, and famously, I didn't show you this. The driver's seat has one armrest. The passenger, they get none. Yes, I can't do an Italian accent, so you got my very worst German accent there. It's definitely a city car, and I think if you are a person who lives in the city, drives to the city, parks in the city, needs to maneuver in the city, this is a fantastic choice. It's nimble, it's peppy enough with traffic. The noise in the ride, I think, would be exhausting on the interstate. But certainly for around town, short jaunts, or driving out into the country, it's a great car. I love it. But overall, I think if you want a car with personality and you're willing to accept some of its foibles, this is a great choice. If you want right-brained, check the boxes, I want it to be as reliable as possible, as efficient as possible, and I don't want a single ergonomic interest, this may not be your car. This is fantastic. I'm so happy. Oh, this is a hoot. Oh, I guess my final thoughts on this, and when I answer the two questions, right, and I talk about would I drive this car, would I own this car and park it in my driveway, I want you to remember this drive. And I'm going to go back and look at it before I upload this, how much of this drive I've been smiling. I think that tells you what you need to know about this car and what I think of it. So, the Fiat 500, I've got to answer those two questions that I ask on every car I review, and I'm a little surprised at the answer. Number one is, would I recommend this car to other people? I gotta say the answer is probably no. While this car is in fantastic shape, except for one thing back here, this is a little faded. This car has been absolutely flawless for the owner. She's had no problems with it at all. It's been ultimately reliable with 58,000 miles on the clock. But there's enough compromises here that I think there's better options. I question who this car is actually for. It's roomier than you would think. It's sprightlier than you would think. But there's essentially no back seat here. Certainly if you got one of the ones that you have a hatch on it, you have a little more usability, but I think you'd end up with the back seats down all the time, and you just use it like a two-door car. In that case, this really competes with the smart car, and it's substantially better than that. I mean, it's light years beyond that, in my humble opinion. But if you're looking for a small car, if you're looking for an affordable car that's reliable, there's a lot of options that make better sense for the left brain of us, right? There's better options out there that are affordable, cheap to insure, safe, efficient, have a usable back seat, have better trunk space. The Nissan Versa springs to mind. A used Honda Fit would really be great. Even a Ford Fiesta or a Yaris. Heck, an old Toyota Echo for that matter. But all of those are lacking that certain special something that you get with this. And that leads me directly into number two. Would I be proud to own one of these? Would I have one of these, and would I park it in my driveway? Would I arrive somewhere in this? And the answer is absolutely 100%, without a doubt, without reservation, yes. These things depreciate like rocks, and you can pick them up relatively inexpensively. The disadvantage is there's not that many out there. But you can't get a small car with this much personality, really, I think, anywhere else. The dash is attractive. It handles fun. It rides like it's excited to be on the road. It doesn't have an overwhelming amount of horsepower, but it manages to get where it's going because there's just not a lot of it. It's got personality. So if you are, and I'm an engineer, guys, remember that, I have an engineering background. If you are going to buy things based on that left brain, checking off the pros and cons and whether it makes financial sense to you, probably not going to get one of these. But if you're tired of that, if you're tired of boring black dashboards and boring black carpet and boring cars that just never seem to break, this might be the antidote for you, because this is full of personality. It's wonderful to drive. I absolutely love it. And I would love to own one. Makes no sense to me sometimes, but I would absolutely love to own it. Let me know your thoughts below, guys. Thanks.